Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Shirley Plant. For those of you that don't know me, welcome to our Q&A tonight with Dr. Dawson Church. I'm a nutritionist and the creator of DeliciousAlternatives.com and the founder of the Eat Real Food Health Summit that's coming up March 17th, which I'm really excited to. Dr. Dawson Church is on the summit with me, and we're talking about how we're not predestined to our genes, which is fascinating. I'm just going to another person. Hi, Natalie. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to mute you. There we go. So welcome, Dr. Church. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and being here tonight.
It's a real pleasure, Shirley, and it was great to have an interview with you earlier as well. So I know the interview on the summit will be fun as well for everyone.
Thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about anxiety and stress, huge topics, and I'm really going to, leave it to you because you are the knowledgeable one. Let's talk really about anxiety and what happens when we experience anxiety and the whole cortisol thing and how lots of cortisol is not good. That equals bad stuff, doesn't it?
It is. And anxiety, of course, is a term drawn from the field of psychology. So we've been used to conceptualizing psychology as separate from medicine. There were psychological disorders and there were medical disorders. So if you had lupus, if you had diabetes, if you had neuropathy, that was medical. But then if you had anxiety or depression or PTSD, that was psychological. We're now finding that these psychological disorders turn out to have extremely strong physiological roots in the body, and you can't really separate them at all. So, for example, one huge study done in England a couple of years ago of 68,000 adults found that people with anxiety had a significantly higher chance of dying early than those without anxiety. And what was shocking about the study was we've always known that depression, anxiety, PTSD are associated with what we call all-cause mortality, people dying from heart attacks, people dying from cancer, all the most common causes of death. We've known that mood disorders, for example, being pessimistic, can take as much as 8 years off your life. And depression, again, is associated with reduced lifespan. But this study looked at mild anxiety. These weren't very anxious people. They had mildly elevated anxiety, and even a slightly elevated level of anxiety was associated with a 15% greater risk of death over the 5-year course of the study. So even a little bit of this negative thinking, these bad thoughts, these anxious patterns can be detrimental to your health. So huge amounts of negative emotion, depression, anxiety, phobias, PTSD is having a direct physiological effect. It's raising levels of cortisol. There are two kinds of genes I like to look at, and those are immune genes and inflammation genes. And so when your cortisol is high, that means inflammation is running rampant in your body. And inflammation has been called the final common pathway in all disease. People who are near death, who are dying, who are in impaired health, they have a lot of inflammation in their bodies. And inflammation is fine in the short term. If you cut your finger when you're cutting up the vegetables for dinner, then your body, the cut bleeds, the blood washes the pathogens away, your body has an inflammatory response at the site of the wound. It sends stem cells and platelets. They close up the wound. Your skin repairs itself. The inflammation is fine in the short term where it's needed. But if it's prevalent throughout your body, it has really bad long-term effects. And cortisol, for example, long-term cortisol results in higher incidences of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, hepatitis, smoking, suicide attempts, all kinds of things that are linked to high levels of cortisol. So you really want to do what you can to lower your stress, not just from those super high levels most of us are used to existing at, but even if you have mild anxiety or mild depression, it's really worth learning meditation, learning tapping, learning all the things you talk about on the summit to reduce those levels to as low a level as you possibly can.
And so tonight, we're going to talk about EFT and tapping. Tell us about EFT. What is EFT?
EFT is short for emotional freedom techniques. There are 48 emotional freedom techniques, and they are to do with mostly with remembering bad things that happened to you in the present or the past, and then releasing any kind of emotional charge you have around that memory. I was just reading the story of one woman today, actually, who gave us her account many years ago, and she was tested. She knew she had some physical issues, but went in to see her doctor in the February of the year she was diagnosed, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Stage 4 is metastasized terminal cancer, and they gave her until November of that year to live. So she was given a little over 6 months to live. That was the prognosis. Not very good at all, because the cancer was spread all over her body. And she thought, well, now, first of all, she refused chemotherapy, refused radiation, because she was a healthcare worker. And she witnessed firsthand the ravages that conventional treatment often wreaks on the bodies of people who go for cancer treatment. And because she was terminal, she knew it was no good anyway. Right. So why slice and dice her body and poison it and subject her body to this huge amount of insult? So she just elected to go home. She thought, I'm just going to die at home peacefully. I'm going to do EFT. I'm going to tap away all my emotional charge and wounding. She had to take walks and do a lot of tapping. She was tapping like dozens of times a day. Wow. It's called tapping because you tap like this on a series of acupuncture points. These are the end points of acupuncture meridians, and there are 14 meridians total. We tap on the end points of these in EFT. We tap on 7 end points. So you just tap on these points very lightly. And while you do that, you remember bad things that happened to you. This sends a calming signal to the emotional brain, and you release that stress. So she did this for literally every single thing she could think of, from the postman being late with her mail the previous week to the fight she had with her sister when she was 4 years old. So she went and just basically cleaned up her act emotionally, just tapped and tapped and tapped every day to give herself this peaceful death. And she began to feel better and better and better. Eventually, in November of that year, she went to see her doctor. They examined her, and she was cancer-free. No cancer. No, none of those cancer, no active tumor. She did have scarring. There were some scars like on her body where the tumors had been growing, but no cancer. So there are many, many stories on my website of people I've had healed from diabetes, cancer, heart disease. I just happened to be Googling cancer today on my own website, and there were like, around 100 stories that came up of people who had been healed of even serious stage 4 cancer. So clearing those emotional traumas, clearing those emotional blocks can have a powerful effect on your health.
So how does EFT then help anxiety?
EFT helps anxiety because when you're anxious about anything, it engages the part of the brain responsible for fight or flight. So we have our big frontal lobes, our modern brain, our primate brain up front here. In the middle, we have our reptilian brain, our mammalian brain. In the back, we have our reptilian brain. And so we have those 3 levels. And when you're anxious, then that engages the fight or flight response in your emotional brain, your mammal brain, and your reptile brain in the back. And so when you are in that fight or flight response, it's turning on all of these stress responses in your body, like adrenaline and cortisol. And when you tap, then you still remember the bad thing that happened, but you no longer feel anxious about the bad thing. Just for example, one woman who was anxious whenever she got onto the freeway. She'd had a car crash, and now she began to feel anxious whenever she was driving on the on-ramp to her freeway. She had a pretty rational fear. She had a car crash. Now she's getting anxious. But there's this phenomenon discovered in the 90s called neural plasticity. Means that as you send signals along a neural pathway, the number of connections increases, and the signaling capacity of that pathway increases. So as she then rehearsed her pattern of being anxious about driving on freeways, she got more and more and more anxious until after a few months she had a phobia. She couldn't drive on the freeway. When she would enter a route into Google Maps, she'd say, avoid freeways, and she'd spend hours driving to avoid freeways as a result. So that's the way that things like anxiety get reinforced in the brain. When you just tap on these points, just a few of these points, and you remember the bad thing that happened, like the car crash, then your memory does not go away, but your emotional response to that bad thing does. So she can still remember the car crash, but she no longer had an emotional charge around the car crash. When her emotional charge around the old car crash went away, then her fear of driving on the freeways went away, and she was able to go visit friends and family. She had a granddaughter who she hadn't been able to see easily because there were several freeways between her and her granddaughter. So it really gave her life back in all kinds of ways. And that's just one example of how EFT is used to treat anxiety. But again, if you go on my website and just type in anxiety, you will probably find over 200 cases like that people have written into us about, saying, I used EFT for my fear of public speaking. One guy told me last week when he was about to propose to his wife, he was so nervous he couldn't propose. And so he tapped and eventually proposed, and they got married. They've been married many years now. So he used EFT for that. People have fears about all kinds of things, not just public speaking. They may have fears of flying. They may have fears of, some people have fears of water. One psychologist told us about a fear of water, and he tapped and the fear of water went away. So all kinds of fears, phobias, anxieties just dissipate. Doesn't mean you forget about the thing. It just means it no longer carries that emotional charge and sends your midbrain and hindbrain into fight or flight. You still have the memory without the emotional charge.
And it's interesting because, you say that some people will have an anxiety about something specific. As you said, flying, she had a car crash, getting on the freeway. But, people wrote into me and they said a lot of people have this free-floating anxiety. They wake up in the morning with anxiety and they don't really know what it is. So I guess maybe my question is, how do we know I think some people have a specific trauma that they remember. As you say, you go back to your childhood when your sister bumped you on the head or whatever. But what if you don't really know what the cause of your anxiety is? Can we determine that?
That's very common, Shirley. Some people can trace it back to a childhood event, like being bullied, being molested, being abused in various ways. Other people may have no sense of where the anxiety comes from. One man who's a member of a club I belong to, a best-selling author, said, I've had this free-floating anxiety all my life and I can't figure out where it comes from. So that's true of many people. In my book, the EFT Manual, I have two main books. One is called The Genie in Your Genes, about the subject of epigenetics. And so that tells you how your thoughts literally are turning on genes, like the genes that code for cortisol or adrenaline or other neurotransmitters and hormones. My other main book is called the EFT Manual. In the EFT Manual, I have several techniques for dealing with problems where you can't remember any particular event. So you may have this uneasy feeling, and you know something's wrong. You wake up feeling vaguely anxious. You can't pin it down. And they're a little bit too detailed to go into here, but there are techniques called the gentle techniques that we recommend for that. And there are also some special techniques when you can't remember a memory, or you have maybe an uneasy physical feeling. Maybe you just start to get the creeps whenever you walk into a certain location. We have techniques for events like that. We can't remember an event, but we have an emotional charge around it. And they are really effective for dispelling those kind of low-level anxieties, as well as those anxieties you can't pin on a particular specific event.
And you, as you said, can go on to your website and order the book, The Genie in My Genes, or the EFT. And I know I'll put on the screen in a little bit, you have a free download too for people to get the EFT manual. But let's go over, the tapping. And actually, before we get to that, I always find it really interesting that little children, you usually don't see little children as anxious. Why is that?
Well, just think, you're born into the world, you come in thinking that the world is your oyster, that everyone loves you. I remember my son, Lionel, is now almost 30, but remember he grew up in a very loving, nurturing household, and then he went to school and had a good couple of years in school. But in his second year in school, one day he came back from school. I could tell something was wrong. He looked very thoughtful, wasn't talking, he was clearly worried. And I just let him digest the experience in his own time. And he said to me, I asked him what had happened that day at school eventually. He said, Daddy, there's another boy in my class, and he doesn't like me. He was discovering that there are people in the world that don't like you. This is a big new discovery when you're 6 or 7. because he'd been in a world before where he thought everyone loved him. Everyone loves everyone, isn't
Right.
that? So kids are like that, and so kids are born with a sense of being loved and nurtured. And in fact, the fastest growing part of our brains for the first 18 months of life is the limbic system, the midbrain, which is the emotional brain, the part of us that relates to other people. It is vital that you receive love from your caretakers when you're young. If you don't get it, you die. Like if you think back to Paleolithic times, go back 100,000 years, 400,000 years, unless the caretakers, the parents usually took care of that baby, the baby died.
Mm-hmm.
So being cute, cooing and googling and making funny faces, that was an essential survival skill to get adults to like you, love you, nurture you, and keep you alive. So we have all these ways of relating to other people. If we don't get that relationship, if we don't get that kind of connection, it can lead to problems. But we are born basically with this innate ability to connect limbically with other people. And then, of course, we wind up having adverse experiences. Now, if you have adverse experiences when you're a child, they can be much more hurtful and harmful than adult ones. If somebody, for example, somebody bothers you or tries to bully you and you're 25 years old, you can walk away.
Right.
You can call the police. You can, if they're in your family, you can just exclude them from family gatherings. You have all kinds of power, personal power as an adult you don't have as a child. The same thing happens when you're 2 or 4. You have no defenses. You do nothing about it. So those kinds of traumas enter in very deep. In fact, they don't enter at the level of the cognitive part of the brain, the forebrain, the frontal lobes. They enter at the level of the limbic system and a part of it called the hippocampus, which handles memory and learning. So you aren't learning cognitively that the world is an unsafe place. You're learning neurologically that the world is an unsafe place, wired into your hippocampus, wired into your memory and learning circuits. And I can tell you, therapists, even brilliant therapists and life coaches, find those kinds of deeply embedded neurological learnings. These are called deep emotional learnings by neurobiologists. Those deep emotional learnings are almost impossible to eradicate. Once that child has learned at the age of 6 months or 2 years, the world is an unsafe place. It is, you can go to talk therapy all you want. You take all the medication you want. And the best you can do is dull the pain. You can't usually get over it. So with energy techniques, now we're finding there are ways of actually shifting those deep-seated emotional learnings.
Because I think a lot of people that experience anxiety, as you said, as a young child, experience fear, whether it was, parents fighting or maybe growing up in an abusive household, right, or a sibling abusing them, or, mother being an alcoholic, whatever. That's, as you say, imprinted. And you can go to talk therapy, but you're almost reliving it, aren't you, when you're doing the talk therapy? Whereas with the tapping, you're getting rid of that sort of emotional charge.
Yes, that's right. You are reliving it with talk therapy. In fact, the term for that is called re-traumatization, telling the story of the assault, telling the story of the bomb blast, telling the story of the car crash over and over and over again. It's using neural plasticity to reinforce those circuits. So you're making yourself more anxious, more crazy over time by retelling the story. You have to have a catharsis while you retell it, and the tapping provides that catharsis. Any kind of therapy that's body-based, that brings you into your body, that allows you not to dissociate, that keeps you here while you think about a bad thing, is going to be effective at discharging that. But if you just retell the story, you're usually back in the event. I remember one Marine, ex-Marine, who talked about this, and he was talking about his very first check ride in a jet on board an aircraft carrier. And he asked me to describe the event. In one of my live classes, he was one of about 40 veterans taking this live class. And so I asked to describe that first ride. And he said, well, I remember the day crystal clearly. I watched the flagman with his signals telling me, you have a green light, go. I heard the tower saying, you're clear to take off. I gave it I put the throttle on full. I felt myself start to lift off. And suddenly I look back and I see fire coming out of my left engine. And I hear the controller in the tower screaming, you're on fire, you're on fire. You've got to bail. And I'm saying, I'm too low to bail. I can't bail. I don't have enough altitude to bail. And the tower saying, bail, bail. So eventually I just jammed the throttle forward. I try to accelerate as fast as I can, and I bail. And then I got out safely, came down. I forget the next little while of the event. And I remember them pulling me out of the water. Now, the reason I'm telling you that story, Shirley, is because I told it the way he told it, which is that he tells you the first part of it, sitting in the cockpit, watching the signals to take off, in the past tense. And he tells being pulled out of the water in the past tense. But when he gets to the most traumatic memory, he says, I see the flames coming out of my starboard engine. In the present tense, he tells the whole story in the present. He's got what my military psychologist friends call the 30,000-yard stare. He's looking into the distance. He's not seeing anybody. He is embedded in that trauma and is reliving it as though it's right here, right now. A friend of mine from New York has written a book called When the Past is Always Present. And he talks about how for people who have been traumatized, the past is it's always there. They're reliving the past, and it's not the past. It is the present. So that traumatized child is reliving those traumatic memories over and over and over again through flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, and so on. And so the crucial thing we have to do is make it part of our history. Now, after tapping, that same former Marine colonel could tell the whole story as the past without a rise in cortisol and without getting all emotionally triggered. That's the miracle of EFT. One time through, and he's over it, and he's moving on with his life successfully.
Wow. So let's go over the tapping points, shall we? So that people can get an idea of what tapping is. And then I guess, do you want to do sort of just around a free-floating anxiety? I think for people, they wonder, what do you say? I know there's a setup phrase. How do we figure out what to say? And how do we start to implement this into our daily health regime?
Well, I have a lot of tips on that in the EFT manual and in the free EFT mini manual.
Okay.
So I have ideas about how to use it with your daily routine. I personally use it every morning just to release anything that holds me back to my highest potential first thing in the day. Okay. So use it first thing in the morning. Also, when you have any kind of stressful event, then use it right afterwards. Don't let that stress keep on going. Also, if you have, for example, a memory crop up of some bad thing in the past, you can tap for that and release that as well. I use it also for things like cravings. I've helped put together some weight loss programs. And actually, just today, happened to be analyzing data for the weight loss programs. And we're finding that people on our programs lose weight, no surprise, but in the year after the program, they keep on losing weight steadily as we track them over time. So not only do they lose weight on the program, they lose weight after the program ends. And that's the wonderful thing about EFT. You don't go back. So using it for cravings, if for example, you're craving, I drive by an ice cream place every day, frozen yogurt. I love their frozen yogurt. I drive by there every single day, sometimes twice a day. And, I just do a little bit of tapping, mental tapping maybe, and then I release that craving. If it wasn't that I'd be stopping in there every day for frozen yogurt, I'd weigh 300 pounds. So... So craving alcohol, craving sweets. One of the cool things about our live workshops is we have a module 8, where we actually bring out chocolate and we give everyone in the room a little pile of chocolate and have them evoke their cravings for the chocolate. And of course, they're craving it often 10 out of 10. We then do a bunch of tapping with them on all kinds of associations they have with the chocolate, and their numbers drop way, way, way down. We did one study that showed that the average reduction in cravings for chocolate, sweets, hard candies, cake, pastries, pasta, all these fattening foods, it went down on average 83% after a round of tapping. So EFT is really effective for craving. So whenever you have a craving and you have a fear, whenever your emotional equilibrium is disturbed in any way, do some tapping. It only takes a minute to tap and then release that and go on your day free of those emotional compulsions.
Okay. So let's go through the points, and then I'm going to put it out in a chat that maybe someone will suggest an anxiety that we could just tap through.
Sure. Okay. We can give it a try. We may have time for one person before I have to run, so that might work.
So anybody in the chat in the bottom of your screen, you can just type in maybe something that you would like us to tap on. Dr. Church is going to show us where we tap, and as I mentioned, I'm going to put the link up on the screen where you can download his mini guide, which will help you to know the sequence and the setup sequence. So yeah, and if everybody's too shy, then we'll just go ahead and we'll tap because we're just too anxious to ask Dawson what we want to tap on. Okay, so anybody, let's just see. I'll just type in the chat here. Okay, so everybody's being shy. Of course, everybody's being shy. Okay, let's just go through. We'll just go through a round. Let's just tap maybe on some general anxiety. Let's say we wake up with free-floating anxiety. You say it's a good idea, Dr. Church, to do some tapping in the morning. Oh, here we go. And the first thing, let's see. Okay, Rita, thank you. I'm finding it hard to sleep without replaying fears over my son's recent medical issues.
Okay. And so, Rita, we don't need to know any more than that. It's handy to know that. And I'm going to use some statements that you've given me, your son's medical issues. What I want you to do, though, is when I say your son, substitute his name. And when I say medical issues, substitute the very worst imagining you have. You may be imagining that he's going to die. You may be imagining he's going to get really sick. You may be imagining he's going to get worse. You may become an invalid. You may become his caretaker. You may have all these wild fantasies of catastrophes that can happen. And that's fine, because with EFT, we actually meet those kind of catastrophizing thoughts head on. We think about them, we verbalize them, and we tap on them. And then they tend to go away, because, of course, most of them are just imaginings, and they aren't really going to happen. So so I'm going to go ahead and just change my camera a little bit here so you can see me tapping on some of all the points. So give me a moment here.
I'm just going to put up here in the chat box too the link.
Good.
Yeah, good, perfect.
Okay, is that the link to the mini manual?
Yes.
Good, great. That's free. That's free. Just download that. That has a diagram of all the points. It has the full instructions for how to do EFT. So download the mini manual through that link, and then you'll be up and running. So first of all, Rita, go ahead and tap over here. Say out loud. Even though my son has these medical issues, I deeply and completely accept myself. And again, substitute his name when I say my son, and substitute the worst of your fears about his medical issues when I say the words medical issues. Even though my son has these medical issues, I deeply and completely accept myself. Once more, even though my son has these medical issues, I deeply and completely accept myself. Tap top of your head. My son, medical issues. Take 2 fingers, tap where your eyebrow meets the bridge of your nose. My son, medical issues. Side of your eye. My son, medical issues. Under your eye. My son, medical issues. On your nose. My son, medical issues. And your lower lip, my son. Medical issues. Then tap where your collarbone meets your breastbone. So if you find the groove over here at the base of your neck, then just go diagonally out about 1.5 inches. You will feel an indentation there. And tap there and say, my son. Medical issues. And the last point is about 4 inches below your armpit. My son, medical issues. Then once more over here, my son, medical issues. Now, before we begin to tap, I forgot to ask you what your level of anxiety was. Normally, I score this on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being no anxiety, 10 being the highest possible anxiety. So just let us know, type into the chat box where you are right now, and also comparatively where you were before.
And why do you tap on, because really you're tapping on the negative, right? She's saying her son's name, she's saying the worst case scenario.
With EFT, we focus relentlessly on the negative. And it's funny, people say, Dawson, you're just such a positive, happy person. And yet when you do these sessions, you keep your clients focused relentlessly on the worst stuff that could possibly happen. You catastrophize as much as possible. You have them imagine the most disastrous scenarios. Why is that? And it's for a very good reason. That reason is because they usually, Shirley, have never had the opportunity in a safe, supportive environment to work through their loss, their fears, their anger, their hurts, and their grief. So I use the example in the EFT mini manual, which I don't know, free download, of a child whose puppy dies when they're 3 years old. And they're just crying and grief-stricken over the dead puppy. And rather than helping the child process their emotions, their dad says, trying to be helpful, says, "Don't worry, Susie, I'll get you a new puppy." So that happens when the puppy dies. That happens when grandma dies when she's 6 years old. That happens when her best friend moves away to a new city when she's 7. And her mom says to her, "Don't worry, Susie, you'll make new friends." So whenever she's feeling these anguished emotions, instead of the person hugging her or being there for her disturbed feelings, she's told to get over them quickly. This too shall pass. Think positive. We're this positive thinking society. And so we mask all of these negative feelings. And what happens is those go into what Carl Jung called the shadow side. I know we have an online relationship course for helping people improve their relationship skills, and we have a lot of case histories in that course. One of them is called the Kill List, and it was about a family that engaged one of our certified practitioners to help them when they were cleaning up their 13-year-old son's room. They came across a list of people who he had what he called his kill list, and that's not a very good thing to find in the home of a 13-year-old boy who might be able to buy guns over the internet. Yeah. So we've had all these school shootings and things, and what is that in a positive thinking society? School shootings. We've had an average of a school violent event or school shooting a week since Columbine, and these things happen all the time, and we're just totally anesthetized to them as a society. But that's the shadow coming out. That's a positive thinking society, and you have this deep undercurrent of helplessness, anger, rage, disenfranchisement. So with EFT, rather than papering it over with "let's think positive, let's get you a new toy, let's get you a new doggy," we say, let's get into those really bad, angry, hurt, helpless, disturbed feelings and tap on them. And when you tap on them, they go from a high to a low number. Now, did Rita?
She did. So she said, just typing it in made me go to about a 6, now a 3 or a 2 after tapping. So Great. At night, I often get up and it's around a 6 or an 8. So I'm thinking, Rita, this would be a great thing for you to do when you get up in the middle of the night and these thoughts are coming. And then you could see where your sort of threshold is and then how you can reduce it by tapping. She also says here, I had learned that the reason people put their finger on their upper lip while worrying over ideas is because it calms the nervous system. Interesting that you tapped under the nose.
Well, people tap on these points all the time. Go and take a look at an elementary school classroom. Go look at a class of people taking a test. Go look at people waiting at a bus stop. Go look at two friends talking to each other over lunch. You'll see two women maybe talking, sharing a lunch with each other. One will say, you know, I was thinking back to this guy I talked to last week. What was his name again? You won't believe what my husband said. And oh God, you know, you can't. I mean, all the things I've had to deal with this week. So you see, you're tapping these points all the time. All EFT does is organize them to a little routine we can use to tap and remember when we're stressed. But human beings touch or tap these acupuncture endpoints all the time.
Okay. Jean writes in, what about migraines? And Jean, I want to know too, because when we're in a migraine, it's pretty intense. So do we tap, you know, when we feel the migraine first coming on, Dr. Church?
What you do is, again, if you tap a lot of different ways for migraine. My recommendation, honestly, is that you, like Shirley, let me ask you a question. Do you get migraines sometimes?
I do.
Okay. And what age were you when you had your first migraine?
It was in my 30s.
Okay, give me your as close to recall your exact age.
32.
Okay, so you had your first migraine at the age of 32. What happened in your life? What was happening in your life when you were 32? What adverse events?
Marriage breakup. Oh, there's that funny laugh.
Yeah, so you see, marriage breakup. Now, that might have been just a little bit emotional, you think? So I'd have you tap on everything I tried to do to make the marriage work failed, or everything that I did, everything that he did, the betrayal, the disappointment, the blah, 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 blah. Tap through it all, and you'll find that your body knows how to be migraine-free. Your body was migraine-free for 32 years.
Right.
That your body has an absolutely perfect knowledge of how to be migraine-free, and it began triggered by an emotional event. Now it's been rehearsing it for a few years after that time. So you've got some neural networks built up around having migraines, but you've got far more built up around it being migraine-free. So go back to the original event, tap on that. I did this with doctors, nurses, healthcare workers. I did a massive study called the Healthcare Workers Study. 216 healthcare workers, psychotherapists, chiropractors, alternative medicine practitioners at 5 different professional conferences. And we found that when they tapped on emotions that were linked to the start of the pain or about the site of the pain, like I hate my tummy, I can't stand my body, I'm afraid that this pain will never go away, whatever it might be, the average reduction in pain was 68% in about a half an hour tapping. For some people, it was more than that in 5 minutes of tapping. So there's a lot of research on EFT for pain, and it shows that about 2/3 of pain goes away in less than half an hour with tapping. So you want to find out which emotional events are linked to your physical events, physical symptoms, and tap on those.
So even with anxiety, maybe we would think back to when was the first time we experienced anxiety? What was going on then? And you would tap on that. Or, you know, for someone that has an illness or even something like IBS, when were your first symptoms?
Yes.
What was going on during that time? Is that more or less what you're saying?
Yeah, you ask people with IBS when it began. They said it began when I was 28. You ask people with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia when it began. They say it began when I was 31, when I was 29. They'll give you a time. Ask about their emotions then, and you always find that there's some kind of emotional link to it. Because again, you know, generally speaking, we're born healthy. Our body is born very functional. Unless you have some kind of genetic disease, your body knows what to do, knows how to heal. Your body is an amazing self-healing machine, and something has happened to interfere with that. Now, it may be something physical, emotional, or energetic. And what's really interesting is the energetic ones. There's some things which are just energetic that hold people back. And we identify those, tap on those. And that's why it's called, EFT is part of the field of energy psychology, because we find when you hit the energy level that things very naturally and easily shift. So you find the energy around the event, the emotions around the event, maybe a spiritual crisis. But that's why I encourage people to systematically go in and clear all of their old wounding. My free guide, which you can download, called the EFT Mini Manual, I have something called the Personal Peace Procedure, where you literally make lists of all the bad stuff that happened to you over the years, and you tap every morning on 3 of them. Even if you have 1,000 things, bad events in your life, if you tap on 3 a day, in 1 year, you clear them all. And you then live your life free of that burden of emotional suffering. So I am so interested in people learning these methods and then applying them, not just when they are in crisis or are in pain, but systematically.
So Jean says, had migraines way back into my childhood, but have no idea what brought it on. Now I realize that eating food with MSG or preservatives brings on migraines.
Yes. And you don't be trying to tap and do emotional healing for things that are physical. You don't be toxifying your body with terrible food or sugar and wheat and stuff like that. All these things are highly toxic to the body. Starches, simple carbohydrates. You got to just get rid of all the things that are toxic to your body. So it's not like you can tap and then go and eat a huge pizza and try and tap away the kind of digestive problems it's going to give you. You have to take care of your body on an external level as well. You have to support it by proper nutrition, by high quality water, exercise. All of those things are essential as well. But when you deal with the spiritual component, nutritional component, the emotional component, all of those together, then you have a lot of leverage points to help. My friend Joe Dispenza says, if you just work on 2 of those components, then the 3rd one tends to self-correct.
And when you're tapping, as you said, you do the setup and you say that setup phrase. So do you just keep tapping until you see a reduction?
You keep tapping until you see a reduction, and you can tap all the way to a 0. And sometimes people go all the way to a 0. Other times they only go down to a 5 or a 3 or a 1. And that's fine. Sometimes we need more time. We may, for example, I worked with one young woman who had rheumatoid arthritis. And she was 22 years old. She'd had rheumatoid arthritis since she was 2 years old. And so 20 years of physical suffering. She'd been getting hydrocortisone injections into her joints since the age of 2. So very, very, very sad, very depressed young lady. And after our EFT tapping session, we worked on emotional events in her family life. And after tapping her, she was 5 in her elbow in terms of pain, 8 in her knee, and 3 in her ankle. And she went down to a 2 in her elbow, a 3 in her knee, and a 1 in her ankle. But that was all she went down the first day. And that was fine. I said, that's fine. Did a lot of work. That's about a half reduction. We'll leave it at that. The next day, she was at one of my live workshops. The following day, she walked in the next morning. There was a bounce in her step. She was smiling. This whole energy of depression had lifted. She was happy. I said, do you have any pain anywhere in your body? And she said, no. So it took her 24 hours, though, to let go of it. Sometimes we need to, we can let go of things gradually. You don't force the client or the body to change in that case.
What if people don't notice a shift? Are they then tapping perhaps on the wrong emotion? Are they saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, occasionally they don't notice a shift, and that is for a number of reasons. One is that they may not be tapping on the right target. For example, there was one woman I worked with who was a therapist, and she said she had her neck, she had frozen neck. She couldn't move her neck very much because of a car crash. And so we tapped on the car crash, and her pain didn't go down, her neck didn't improve. So I asked her, well, were there any earlier car crashes in your life, any earlier similar events in your life? She said, oh yeah, well actually it was a really early one when I was 8 years old. We did a bunch of tapping on that, and tapping on the car crash when she was 8 years old, she got a little bit more range of motion improvement, a little bit lower pain, but not very much. So we tapped on, and again, in my live workshops, I talk about aspects of an event, and aspects are all the kinesthetic and sensory channels. So we maybe what we saw during a traumatic event, what we smelled, what we heard. So we tapped with her on what she smelled, the screech of burning, the burning rubber, the smell of the oil and gas. We tapped on the sound of the tires. We tapped on the crunch of metal, all of those things. And when we tapped on all of those aspects, her numbers began to shift a little bit. But eventually during this particular crash when she was 8 years old, she was in the passenger seat of the car, and her sister was driving. We tapped on all these different aspects, and her sister was 15 at the time, and she suddenly said to herself, I just remembered that day my sister was underage, and that day I dared her to drive the family car. So she recovered this fragment of the memory, 8-year-old memory, and that's where all of the trauma was locked up, and she had dissociated and buried that and forgotten that for the previous 30 years. We tapped on that, and all her numbers went to zero, her pain went away, and she regained full range of motion in her neck. So you have to find the way the brain encodes trauma is very, very interesting. It can be buried like that, and it can take really work with a practitioner to get to the bottom of those kinds of issues.
And I was going to ask you that. Where would people go? Would they go to your site to find a practitioner in their area? How would you find a practitioner to work with if you wanted to do that?
Yeah, you want to work with a clinical EFT practitioner because they're highly trained in all of those 48 EFT techniques. And if you download the mini manual, you'll wind up on a page where you have a link to our certified practitioner database. These are all people who are highly trained. They take online tests. They're supervised in their delivery EFT. They have to get recertified every 3 years. They go through a lot of training to be on that website, and they're really, really brilliant. One of the privileges I have, Shirley, is that they email us stories every week of clients they've worked with. And you just want to cry reading these breakthroughs of healing. Every week we get these coming in, and they're absolutely amazing how our certified practitioners work with people, and people have breakthrough results.
That's wonderful. Well, I so appreciate this and you taking the time with us. I've left the link there so people can go on to your site. Remind everybody the site to visit, please, Dr. Church.
Well, the easiest site to go to is just my name, Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N, and then the word gift.com, DawsonGift.com. And that'll give you the EFT mini manual. It'll give you a link to my favorite meditation technique. It'll give you a link to all of our certified practitioners, our weight loss program, our relationship program, and a whole bunch of useful tools you can use to implement these stress reduction tools in your life. And I really recommend you do this. I mean, you are worthwhile. You are precious. And why not go back to that place you were when you were a baby, where you were living in love with life, living in love with the world, living in love with your body, and you felt really great. So tap away all those things that cause you anxiety, cause you distress, cause you pain, and reclaim that wonderful self that you came here to be. Why suffer a moment longer than necessary? Most suffering is optional, and you can tap it away with EFT. So go to DawsonGift.com, download the mini manual, check out on the other resources there, and just liberate yourself from all that stress that otherwise would bog you down.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Dr. Church. We will send this recording out to everybody that signed up. And of course, please join Dawson and myself on the Eat Real Food Health Summit that's coming up March 17th. Thank you so much.
And you. Thanks again.
Good night, everybody.
That was lovely, and those were great questions.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for joining me here. It was wonderful.
It was wonderful both times, Shirley. Thank you so much as well.
Have a wonderful evening.
Bless you.
And you.